All right. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Office Hours. We got Tommy Walker today, and we got a poll here. Attendees, are you in-house or you're freelancer? Submit your vote. All right.
So,
Tommy,
how's
I
your
got a
week been
question
going
for
so
you.
far, David?
It's going well, man. I got a question for you. Where are you based out of
Yeah,
right
go
now?
ahead. What's that?
Where are you based out of right now?
Dover, New Hampshire is where my office
Dover.
is.
Oh, are you like close to nature? Going outside very often?
You know, the funny part is about where I live is we're about an hour away from everything. So if I went like an hour north, I'd be in the mountains. If I went an hour south, I'd be in Boston. If I went an hour or an hour east, I'd be at the beach. And an hour west, I'd be in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, it's actually a pretty cool little central place. And
Nice.
surprisingly, the town that's about 30 minutes south of me was voted by National Geographic the best small town in America. So
What's the criteria for that?
I have no idea, but they have an excellent food scene, and everything is really great and small and idyllic. It's like a small little city, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. If you ever get the chance to look at it, it's awesome.
Oh yeah, Portsmouth is great.
Yeah.
Well then, you've already sold how great Dover is in your areas. But if you could live anywhere in the world for a year, where would it be?
Dover. No, I actually had a really good time. I visited Istanbul a few years back, and I thought that was really great. And I'd love to try London, I think.
Have you
Yeah.
been there?
No, I haven't. I
Oh,
did
okay. You
spend some
haven't been
time
there,
in
but
Berlin,
you
though.
want to. Okay, Berlin's awesome.
Yeah, loved Berlin. So,
Sweet. All
what
right.
about you? Where would you live?
I was hoping you wouldn't pose that back to me. The first place that comes to mind, only because I was slacking with Carissa, who's hosting this in the background. She's going to Italy for
Yep.
next year, and I'm like, oh, I would love to spend a year in Italy.
That would be
Um,
amazing.
yeah, somewhere like south. I
Yep.
spent time in the north before, but didn't really get to see the south very much. But maybe we can pose that to the audience who's here. So, folks, please introduce yourself. What's your name? Where are you based? And if you could live anywhere in the world for a year, where would it be? In the meantime, Tommy, I'm going to jump into an intro for you. You have a very robust background. I'm sure everyone's going to be excited to learn from you. So, everyone, we got Tommy Walker here. He is the founder of the Content Studio, a content marketing consultancy for high growth B2B SaaS startups and Fortune 1000 enterprises. He's consulted with companies like GoDaddy, Twitch, LinkedIn, and more. You've probably heard of those. So, Tommy, take it away.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you letting me come on here today, too. I love office hours and everything you guys are doing at Omniscient. So let's jump into this. Let me just pull up my screen here. And you'll have to forgive me for some of this. There we go. Screen 3. Let's hope this works out the way I want it to. All right, cool. So the question that I ask, I host a show every week. It's called The Cutting Room. And on the show, I talk to content marketers from industry-leading companies like Calendly, Airtable. Who else have we had recently? I don't remember, but we've had folks from industry-leading companies, and we talk about their content marketing philosophy, process, and pregame before they edit an article live on the stream. And the first question that I ask everybody, because it's at the heart of what we do, and it's often something we don't think about very often, is what is your content marketing philosophy? Now, I posed this question on Twitter not too long ago and started to get some of the same types of answers, right? We'll ask people, what's your content marketing philosophy? Add value to your audience always, and always have a distribution plan, create value or create nothing, focus on audience, provide value, right? Really good comprehensive articles that solve people's problems, educate, solve pain points, and above all else, leave readers with something to think about. Now, bless everybody. These are really good answers. But the question I always have is how, right? What does create value or be audience centric even mean? And how do you create value for both your reader, your viewer, or your listener and yourself? And how do you know when you've done that? Now, from what I've noticed, without having a concrete and maybe even codified philosophy, these phrases can become really hollow and they sound good. And maybe even they make us feel good about ourselves, but ultimately have little meaning. And we create in vacuums, and we don't really know if our work has had any sort of meaningful impact on anyone. I can't tell you how many times even I have felt like I'm shouting into the void when we create a piece of work. Is this helpful? I don't know, right? So the problem with that approach is that when we use tools like ClearScope or any of the other million content marketing tools that are out there, when we look at something like this, we start to see this as a checklist of the different phrases that we need to hit. We start to see word counts as arbitrary, right? We try to hit these arbitrary word counts. And these aren't ranking factors, right? These are things, these are goals that we're trying to hit that aren't even necessarily relevant these days. And it makes it so we think about these tools and don't use them. Think about these tools in a way that doesn't really unveil their true power, right? And here we can see John Mueller, right? The search advocate for Google says word count is not a ranking factor. Save yourself the trouble. We've seen right now with Ahrefs, they put out a study a little while ago. They said they found a moderate negative correlation between word count and organic traffic. So the more words does not necessarily mean the better. And the idea is that correlation is not causation in a lot of these cases, because you do see the word count and correlation in the very top part here, but it's not causation. In fact, it really does come down to what are you doing and what's the soul and conversation you can bring to the table, right? And how can you get people to feel? And something that's interesting, just an interesting little statistic that I found, because I think a lot about how people read and interact with pages. The average American adult reads nonfiction at a rate of 238 words per minute. If you look at the average blog post introduction, you've got anywhere between 300 to 500 words of somebody kind of just what I say, clearing their throat to get to the idea that they're trying to do, and then you get into the main meat of the article. If we think about the average reading rate of somebody, they're spending an entire minute of you just ramping up, and that's not really interesting. It's terrible to know that you have written, you've spent so much time, and then somebody's not even getting past your opening paragraphs, right? So when we look at things this way, right, it becomes really easy to create soulless, hollowed out content, and you're just trying to tick off the boxes. You're creating articles that have a certain length. You're trying to have the right headlines and subheadlines. But this is an example. I took this from the ClearScope website. It's not an example of this in the screenshot, but when you take it too far in the wrong direction, we become obsessed with praying to the Google gods that we're trying to rank an article and lose sight of what something might actually be searching for in the first place, right? We also lose sight that search optimized content is a great front door for people, but it's often the content that has little to no search value that actually gets people to make decisions, right? A lot of people now are saying the 0 to 10 things, or the 0 to 10 search traffic is what's bringing the most business, and it's because they're super highly intense. And maybe that's a harsh reading of the entire thing, but my experience, this mentality runs rampant across teams and across companies and across the industry of all sizes and brand recognition. I've worked with Fortune 1000 brands, and I see this everywhere. And it's a misreading of what these tools can do and how it all, the content, how it all works together as part of a holistic strategy. So I ask you again, audience, what is your content marketing philosophy? This is the audience participation time. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the chat. So what I've found with my content marketing philosophy, I've asked this a bunch, and I've started to think about it myself, is if we want to create soul, right? Because that's kind of what the premise of this this presentation is about. If we want to create soul, we have to understand what those parts of our philosophy are when it comes to the content that we create. Now, these are mine, right? They don't necessarily have to be yours. This is just a starting point for you to think about how you think about content and what it is possible to do for you. So the 3 axioms of content marketing for me are: a good premise will get you 80% of the way there, content is a form of social currency, and decisions are made in Slack, right? And we'll go into each one of these. So good premise will get you 80% of the way there. What do I mean by that? If you are able to create a good premise that is easy to understand, right? There's a form around it. It's something that we can totally get and easy to wrap our heads around. That makes it totally easy to plant our flag in somebody's brain. And the thing is, with a good premise too, people are going to be kind of forgiving of some of the execution if the premise is promising. So I'll give you a few that I found online, and maybe you can tell me in the chat if you recognize these, and then I'll give you my own selfish premise here. So this is the true story of 7 strangers picked to live in a house, work together, and have their lives taped to find out what happens when people stop being polite and start getting real. Audience, do you know the premise of that? What's that show? Yeah, exactly. Cool. So here's another one, right? Yes, real world. Here's another one. We follow the self-documented daily struggles of 10 individuals as they survive alone in the wilderness for as long as possible using a limited amount of survival equipment. What do we got there? It's a bit of a different one. Okay. This is a great show that you can watch on Netflix if you are into these types of shows. It's not Survivor. It is a show called Alone, and it is absolutely incredible to watch. And then the last one here: can expert cake artists make cakes so lifelike that they're confused with the real world objects they represent? What do we got? Is it cake, right? Now, these are interesting premises or premises that really are kind of the hook, right? And when you come up with this, it's really able to deliver. If you can deliver on the promise of whatever your premise is, right, then you have this ability to really attract people to this interesting and unique thing and create something further than that grabs people's attention and lets them go along on the journey with you. So again, the premise of my show is we talk to industry-leading content marketers about their content marketing philosophy, process, and pregame before they edit an article live. Very simple, very succinct. And this is something that it's easy to latch onto, and it's something that moves on to the next part of what we're talking about here, which we'll actually talk about that in a second. So the question is how do you come up with a good premise, right? I'm throwing this out here at you, but how do you come up with a good premise, right? And a lot of it comes down to creating a lot of research, doing a lot of research. And what I found, this was something with a client that I worked with. We worked with a massive podcast agency. They specialize solely on the creative development and execution. And we look at the audience targeting model, right? And to help us better understand the podcast ideal audience, we go through this audience targeting model exercise where we look at the core, adjacent, and transformational different parts of the audience, right? And if we look at this here, the core audience are the exact people who you think are going to be the most ideal for. So in my particular case, it would be senior level content marketers. The adjacent audiences are people who are just outside of that core universe. They haven't heard of it, but obviously they're going to get something out of it in my show. And I hate to keep using myself as an example here, but those are content marketers within high growth startups. And then the transformational audience are the people who you want to reach, but they're the kind of last audience that it's a downstream effect that they get this, right? That get value out of that. And so for my show, it's freelancers, right? So I've got primary audience, senior level content marketers, large organizations, mid-level audience, content marketers within high growth startups, transformational freelancers. Everybody gets something different out of the show, but we see that. And if we start to define what these are, right, who these audiences are, you can see here, right, the aspirational entrepreneur, your core audience, right? What are they looking for? They're starting out, they're looking for inspiration. They want to stop working a job. They want to find life balance. They're maybe, if they're in e-commerce, they're pre-commerce. These are people who have thought about this stuff, but haven't quite taken that leap yet. They're looking for permission. They're not billionaires, right? The adjacent audience, these are people who are a business owner, but they want to achieve something in their life, or they're not necessarily a business owner, but they want to achieve something. And then the transformational audiences never will be an entrepreneur, but looking for life lessons. The transformational audience, the one that I can relate to the most is HGTV and any DIY videos that I might find on YouTube. We'll never do these projects, but I always feel really accomplished when I see them. Anyone else here? Is that anyone else in the same boat there? Yeah. So if we look at, right, when we start looking at these core audiences and these premises of what we're looking at here, we've got, 7 strangers, right? When we start looking at the who we're going after, what the premise is about, we've got 7 strangers. They're survivalists. They're expert cake designers, right? That's the who. The what is they're pick to live in a house, survive alone in the wilderness, and create realistic cakes. And we've got the why are they doing it? See what happens when people stop being polite, win $500,000, and fool people into thinking their cakes are real. So we need to understand with these different audiences who it is that they're following, right? What it is that they're doing, and what it is that they're doing it for, right? We have to understand that about all of our audiences. That way we're able to really start defining what that soul is that we're trying to go after. So the question is, for me, is how do you start to develop that? Once you've identified what those audiences are supposed to be, now how do you start to figure out what it is that you're going to create that has that soul, that speaks to those, the core spark, right, of what it is that they're trying to do? And I say this is immersion research. So for me, it's read 200 competitor blogs. I watch every webinar. I read every case study. I watch every video. I listen to every podcast, subscribe to every newsletter, and I take handwritten notes, right? And I'll give you a concrete example of this because this is really easy to sort of say and throw out there and say, this is what you need to do. So I was at Shopify Plus. I was the first marketing hire over there and employee number 14 on that side of the house. And the challenge that I had at the time was, how do I create content that is both differentiated from the rest of the market? And furthermore, how is it differentiated from the rest of Shopify? Now, from a features perspective, there were not very many differences between Shopify Plus and Shopify. At the time, we had a customizable checkout, lower transaction fees, and dedicated customer service. That was it. And as a cloud competitor at the time, and this is at a time when nobody was taking cloud e-commerce seriously, which is kind of laughable now, but at the time, every other competitor was competing on features, right? And we didn't have those features. And our leadership made a good point of saying that a lot of the features that people have are bogging them down. They cost more to implement. They take more time. And it's a hassle to just get these things out there. And what I found when I was doing my research, both with my competitions blogs and with their lead generation material, is that everybody was talking about their features, right? Everybody was talking about how their features were the best and how they were completely customizable and all of this other stuff. And it was from somebody who was trying to figure out what the market was saying and doing. I realized that there wasn't a lot of differentiation there. And knowing that we had the limitation of not having those features, I had to figure out what else we can do. So the major thing, my guiding philosophy, I had 2 of them. One was, what can somebody do when technology gets out of the way? And that guided every single thing that we created after that. And then where can we jab where other people are weak? So I'll give you 2 examples of this. One, our lead gen, what I found in everybody else's lead gen is that they were very boring white papers that were literally just white with text on them and really uninteresting to look at. No visual interest whatsoever. And because we weren't competing on features, I said, if we can't compete on features, then we're going to compete on knowledge. So we created a series of 8 industry reports that projected out what was going to happen in the next 5 years. So from 2015 to 2020, 2020's projections were way off, but 2020. And we were talking about the trends. So we saw things like AR and virtual reality and all of these things that were starting to emerge. And we created these 100-page reports that were showing people these are the things that you'll be able to take advantage of, right? And the subtext of those reports was, this is what can happen when technology gets out of the way. And these reports, and I wish I had put a slide in here that shows you, but these reports were designed like magazines. They were highly editorialized. They were laid out like magazines. And we even went so far as to print out hard copies and have a product launch, right? We did the launch. We had a gallery in a New York speakeasy. So we had an art gallery where we blew up interior pages of the site or of the book. And then in the back part, when you have to go through a hidden trap door, you'd go through into a speakeasy where we'd have hard copies all over the place. And we use that as a networking opportunity for our partnership team. And what that showed our partners was that we were going above and beyond for the industry and what we were trying to do. So this was something that had a lot of soul, and it was completely differentiated because I saw what nobody else was doing and then said, this is stuff that's not going to scale, but it's stuff that's going to stand out. And it's only because I read everything and saw everything that everybody was doing that I was able to go, yes, let's do this, and have a very, very data-informed response to what was happening in the market. We don't often do that. A lot of times we just guess. So what should a premise include, right? So if we look at, we look at the main character, right? Your premise should include a brief description of your protagonist. So if we go back to what I was saying before, protagonist is 7 strangers living in a house, or survivalists, or expert cake designers. The situation or obstacle, what's the crisis or extraordinary situation do they find themselves in, right? They're picked to live in a house. They have to survive alone in the woods or create realistic cakes. And their goals. What is the premise of their goals? And they need a simple explanation of what their main character desires or wants. So when people stop being polite, live in a house together, win $500,000, or thinking about their cakes, getting people to fool people about their cakes, right? And proving that they're the best at what they do. When you know your audiences, right? These are the things that you need to be asking when it comes to creating the premise. Who's the main character? What's the situation that they're in? And what are their goals? Now, how do we create something that's unique based on what we've seen from everything else that's in the market? Okay. And then when we start to really codify what the premise of these things that we're creating are, we can use this exercise. And this is something that, again, comes from the research that we had done with the podcast company at one of my clients. And when we start talking about the job that this particular piece of content is supposed to be doing, so in this case, it was a podcast, for the person with the job to be done, so this would be your primary audience, our property will grant them the power of, right? And what's the power that they want to do? Whereas today they have to do this bad thing. After listening to the show, they'll be able to do good, boring, good, interesting things. So, so using myself as a selfish example of this, right? For senior level content marketers who don't have the ability to look over, or for senior level content marketers, my show will grant them the power of looking over their peers' shoulders. Whereas today they have to live in isolation on their own. After listening to the show, they'll be able to see what their peers are doing within other industries. And I can redefine that for those 3 primary audiences that I'm going after. And if you want to check out what the Jobs to be Done framework is, if you're not familiar with this, go ahead and check out that link. So bit.ly, job STBD. Amazing, amazing stuff. Right. And then the thing is once you have this premise, once you've figured out what that premise is, validate with outreach. Right. So I'm terrible at the cold outreach game, but when I was looking at my own show with this, I reached out to probably 4 dozen people, did $10 gift cards to Starbucks, and said, hey, what do you think about this? Right? Here's the very simple premise of what we're trying to do. And what do you think? And based on the conversations that we had, we could further develop the concept and the idea just based on what people saw. And if you take this crawl, walk, run approach, you can validate the concept, start putting stuff out there. And if it starts to gain some traction, then you throw a little bit more behind it and throw a little bit more behind it. My friends over at Omniscient know this very, very well with the properties that they've been creating. Right? So axiom number 2, content is a form of social currency. What do I mean by that? So when we share content, right, the content that we share is representative of our tastes, our style, and it is a reflection of who we are and what we find interesting. Just like your clothes are some sort of outward representation of who it is that you want to present to the world, what you share and what you're willing to stake your reputation on is also comes in the form of content, right? You share a bunch of crappy stuff with the people in your Slack channels and your team, people are going to trust that you don't have a good filter for what it is that you're creating. So we have to think about how are people framing this when they share our stuff privately, and what are they staking their reputation on? Not how do we feel about our stuff, but what is our stuff going to say about the person who's sharing it, right? So we have to think about that. Now, there was a study done by the New York Times a few years back, and this was actually remixed by the friends over at Foundation Marketing. They made it look all nice and designed. But they asked, why is it that you share to their readers? And these were the five main things that they found. So to bring valuable and entertaining content to others, to define ourselves, so exactly what I'm talking about there, to grow their relationships, self-fulfillment, and to get the word out about causes or brands. So digging into that a little bit further, right? I share to enrich the lives around me. And because they wanted to bring valuable and entertaining content to others. So this is something as simple as how-to content, right? Or something as simple as memes, or something as complex as how-to content, right? You're trying to like make yourselves look good and to help other people feel good about themselves. 94% of people carefully consider how the information they share will be useful to the recipient. Same idea, right? You have to really think about, what does this going to say about you? And 49% of people say that sharing allows them to inform others of products that they care about, and potentially change opinions or encourage action, right? You see this all the time on social media, and I think it's really important to keep in mind. Next one, to define ourselves to others, right? Try to only share information that reinforces the image I'd like to present. And 68% of people said that they give people a better sense of who they are and what they care about. This is the same deal. Again, you share things across your social network. You want to make sure that you're sharing things that make you look good. You share things in your private networks. That's even more important, right? Grow and nourish relationships. Miss the companionship and conversations on Facebook. I feel like I'm probably missing out on some things without that connection. This is one of those situations where the identity behind it, right? If you're starting a conversation on Facebook with somebody else's content, or starting a conversation on Twitter, or starting a conversation just in general with somebody else's content, you might as well have been the person to create it if you're the reader, because you're able to be at the center of that conversation because you're the one who started it and brought some conversation up. So let's see. So share information online because it helps them stay connected to the people they may not otherwise stay in touch with, or share information because it helps them connect with others who share interests. This is the whole foundation of social media, right? And it's what we have to think about when we're creating the premise of, what is this going to say about the people who are sharing it? How is it going to help them nourish their relationships? Right? Self-fulfillment. Again, if I can be at the center of a conversation, I like getting comments from people. It makes me feel good about myself, right? That's why they share content. 69% of people say it allows them to feel more involved in the world. It's because they're they're the center of the discussion. Right? Or get the word out about causes or brands. This one's pretty straightforward, right? A lot of people share things about, this is more political in my mind, but it's also something where, if somebody's asking for a recommendation on a product or a software, right? Oh, hey, here you go. This is something that I think is really great. I use this. I've gotten recommendations for different software based on other people, right? So now I get that shared with me, and now I make the decision, and I've got the trust and the word of mouth and all that stuff we hear about all the time. And here's just sort of a sub axiom of mine where, and you've probably heard me say this if you follow my work at all. I've definitely said this on the podcast. If you don't get return visitors, you're never going to end up in the consideration set. So especially if you're in the B2B SaaS space, nobody's going to want to work with you or nobody's going to buy from you if you're not getting them to come back to you repeatedly over and over. So the question is like, not only do we create stuff that's going to say good things about the person who's sharing it, but how are we doing that in a way where they feel comfortable coming back on their own over and over again, but also to get the people downstream in their network coming back and being comfortable sharing over again. Right. And then 3, this is probably my favorite. Decisions are made in Slack and other private channels. Right. The main thing behind this is all the conversations that we are having now, buying committees, these things are all being made in Slack, right? Most of the conversations we can't track. We don't have attribution to these. And we can't actually physically see what people are talking about in a lot of cases. And there's research out there that says, I think it's 60-something% of buying decisions are made before they ever reach out. So we have to understand what conversations we're trying to create when people are talking about this in private channels, right? And the only way that we can do that is coming up with a solid premise and really understanding who our audience is. And I hate to say that because it sounds really cliche, but knowing what they're exposed to and then creating things that aren't necessarily in line with everything else that's being out there, right? And kind of guiding what that conversation is going to look like rather than just sort of putting stuff out there and hoping for the best. So that's primarily it for me. So I ask you again, audience, what is your content marketing philosophy? And if you want to come check out what I'm doing with my show, you've got bit.ly, the cutting room. You can check that out there. Let's stop sharing my screen here. Disable screen sharing.
We got a couple questions for you here.
Yeah, go for it.
That was, as usual, you always get me to think about content very differently compared to how I'm thinking about it. So we got a couple questions. Schmitty here asks, how much do you think the need to sell content as a commodity contributes to the lost soul approach to content marketing that you're challenging here?
That's a great question, and one that I would challenge to say, make it so your content's not a commodity. Your content, like commoditized content, is something that is completely within our hands as creators, right? Alex has great experience with this. I have great experience with this working for Conversion XL. There would be times that you get subjects that have to be, they're covered by other people time and time again. And if you're looking at things like how to or what is, right? These are common subjects. The question that you have to ask yourself is, what is this to me, right? Not just what is it, but what is it to me? What's my interpretation of this? Because it's really easy to fall into the commoditized content space, especially if you're a freelancer. But it's also something that, yes, you have to make your money. And at the same time, you have to have your own standards for what you're willing to put your name on. And in my mind, and that might not be the best answer or the most reassuring answer, but it's always a matter of going, what's true to me and my beliefs, and how do I put it out there? And instead of thinking about, the stuff I put out there is generic or commoditized, because commoditized content's just not doing anything anymore anyways.
Yeah. If I could add to that too, you mentioned, Tommy, the like, what is it to me or like to us type of thing. And another analogy is like, instead of how-to content, it's how we do this thing or how I do this thing. So you're embedding more of that nuanced experience. Like, we've worked with a lot of technical companies who have developers as their audience, and like you can sniff out when someone's BSing and you don't have firsthand
Mm-hmm.
experience. So if you can find a way to infuse that, I think that reduces the commoditized feeling. But Schmitty says, you know, there are people saying, hey, for each article, we'll sell 1,000 words for X $100 and we'll get a B plus ranking or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I can see how that sort of framing or the way the industry has gone can kind of commoditize content.
Yeah, and I mean it's a constant uphill battle, right? It's a struggle that we all especially now, you're starting to see this shift between, you know, we need to pump stuff out and we need to differentiate. And I think as an industry, as individuals, we need to be promoting differentiated content in general, and especially if we're freelance, but even in house, you kind of have to fight that fight of going, yeah, this is what nobody else is doing. Here's the research that supports that. And here's why I think this will do better than everybody else.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of going, here's a keyword list and these are the keywords that people are going after. It's going like, this is what everybody's saying and this is what we can say that nobody else can and we're uniquely qualified to.
Right? Yeah. Maybe that's
Omniscient's a great example of this too.
Thanks. Maybe to make that more tangible, why is it a good example and what can people take away from what we do? And maybe this is me asking you to tell me what we're doing well so that we can
No, I think the thing, like because you've written some stuff on like audits and how you approach that type of work and audience building. I know we've talked about the audience centricity and the way that I think you have codified this stuff or really started to put words to things that people don't know or supporting it with research. It's going that extra mile, right? And there's nothing that I'm going to say that doesn't sound really cliched, right? But it's really about taking that 2 or 3 extra steps that make it so nobody else is willing to even do that work, let alone put it out there. So it's about asking those questions that nobody else, or answering those questions that people are asking, and even some of the ones that people don't even know that they need to be asking. And you guys do a great job of that.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think that might segue into this next question from Caleb, who asked, to what extent do you think soulful content might be more appropriate for smaller organizations versus, say, larger corporates?
It's more important. It's the absolute most important thing ever. Shopify, it's a weird thing now, right? For me, because Shopify, when I was there, was not the brand that it is today. I was there at a time where it was becoming the brand that it is today. But like I said, I was there for the first 1,500 customers of the Shopify Plus, and we were still, I think, maybe 150,000 as the entire company. Now they're reaching millions of people. Cloud e-commerce wasn't being taken seriously. Like nobody knew what Shopify was. And taking this approach of soulful content, doing things that nobody else was doing. And I'll give you another example of this, right? When we did our case studies, everybody else was doing the company X works with company Y and sees Z results, right? Standard stuff. And it's what you would expect. And people kind of have an idea of what to expect. And when you do what's expected, it's not interesting. So the way that we approached our case studies, I said, if everybody's taking this approach, and now granted, that approach has its place, but if everybody else is taking this approach, then we're going to treat these as Rolling Stone interviews, right? And, you know, company X works with company Y and sees Z results. I'll give you an example of what could have been and what actually was. So what could have been was a company that we were a customer of ours. Their server room had caught on fire in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. The IT person had called the CEO and said, hey, our server room's caught on fire. So they moved over to Shopify Plus, and now they don't have to worry about their server room catching on fire anymore, right? Cool. And sales have increased by whatever, right? David, I don't know if you've heard me tell this story before.
I have not heard this one.
Okay. So taking this Rolling Stone approach, though, we learned that the CTO called the CEO at 3 o'clock in the morning on the night of his bachelor party. Changes the entire framing of the whole story, and it makes it a lot more interesting to read, right? And yes, we got into the results and we got into all of that before, or like as a part of it. But what we were finding when we were taking this approach, the soulful approach, was that, you know, our interviews, people would tell these really crazy stories about that. And some people would, you know, why did you start the thing that you started? Tell me the behind the scenes. And what we were looking at was not necessarily and this was part of the conversation that I would have with my author too, is that I don't want to know what the impact was on the company. I wanted to know what the impact was on the individual who was doing the work, right? And we found some founders were starting their businesses as an FU to their bullies, right? Or they were really interested in what was happening with fair trade in some of these places where the indigenous people were creating really great things, but didn't have an outlet. So we got these really human approaches and understood why it was that people were doing their things. And then our tool was just part of the thing that helped them get to their mission and their own personal satisfaction, rather than this is what gave us our business results. Like, I know that that's going to be the case when I go to read a case study, right? I'm expecting you're going to tell me all the good things about what happened. I'm not expecting you telling me that your customer was drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning and that's why they switched over. And that's something that I can relate to. So to answer the question, to go back to it, where do I think might be more appropriate for smaller companies? I think it's the most important thing you can do, because you're more agile and you have a little bit more permission than a larger org. And just to sort of dig into that a little bit more, we had a very small customer base at the time, and all of our competitors had a really large customer base. And because we had a small customer base, we could constantly pump out case studies. We published one every week, every Friday, a new case study, because we were growing with our customers. So it was very easy to say to our customer success team, hey guys, who do you have that would make for a good case study? Tell me who your most interesting people are. And then we'd make those connections. So even though we didn't have as big of a customer base as our competitors, we had a bigger customer base than our competitors by perception, because we were constantly publishing these new stories. And they were being done in a way that nobody else would or could do, because they were carrying around a lot of weight from their organization.
I love that. Yeah, you're saying that it's probably more important for small organizations. I want to flip that also and say, if you're at a big corporate, and Caleb, I don't know what your role is or what company you're at, but imagine if a large corporate like did something like this compared to what the others are doing, it would make that company probably stand out a lot more. Like, oh wow, this isn't just a faceless entity and like spewing out what I would typically expect. They're instead actually entertaining me or providing something much more interesting than their competitors. There's kind of a lot of commodities, software, maybe content now too. So if you can break away from that, it's scary, because you can't validate it'll work. You look at everyone else and you're like, oh, maybe I should just do what they're doing, which is probably the flaw in thinking there.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, like, because I've done the whole span of agency to high growth startup to old guard corporation, between the different range of my career, like from freelance to I was at Intuit, like QuickBooks, right? And I've worked with GoDaddy. I've, like, you know what I mean? Like, and what I've found, and don't tell any clients I've said this, but what I've found is that the bigger the organization are, the more scared they are of change. So if you're in a smaller org, you're able to throw that around, and sort of bob and weave around what they're trying to do. And this is true of like a product standpoint too. It's not just content. But the other side of that is, if you're in the larger org, then you have to play the politics game, which is a whole separate, that's a job all on its own, to start to be able to throw your weight around and do things that nobody else can do. MailChimp is a great example of a company that is doing stuff that nobody else was doing with their podcast network and their, videos and small movies that they're doing and stuff like that. So and that all has to be supported with the research of saying, I read 200 blog posts. I read all of the, like, I am the market now. I understand all of it. Here's what nobody's doing, right? Presenting the case that way.
Yeah.
I see here, S. Miller says, can I give you an example of my best work? Here's the industry report I was talking about. I'm proud of a lot of work that I've done, but here's the industry report I was talking about.
I love that was just a very clear, yep, here's the link versus oh, let me think about it. Like you were prepared to answer that.
I referenced it before, so why not? It's one of the
Yeah,
things I'm the most proud of.
I love it. I actually need to take a look at that too. So I just going on that line of thinking around big corporations, I had a question for you because every time I teach a workshop or anything, the question's always, well, how do I convince leadership to try this? So
Mhm.
maybe in your case, you can speak to your experience at Intuit or QuickBooks. Like, how do you make a case to internal stakeholders to like, hey, let me just take some time to zoom out from production and like use time and budget to do this research and like figure out
Yeah.
our angle and do something different where, you know, they might be scared. They're like, why do that when we should be doing this or something?
Yeah, that's the hardest part. I mean, and it's always circumstantial. I think more of it's going to be back channeling and building trust that way, rather than the big corporate decks. Finding allies are always that's the first step, right? You present to the ally informally and say, hey, here's the concept, right? And then from there, I've at Shopify, I never had to create a single deck, right? I'll put
Really?
that out. I got
Wow.
spoiled at Shopify because the company's ethos was, we hired you, we trust you know what you're doing. Make mistakes if you need to make mistakes. Nobody's going to remember it, 2 weeks from now, anyways, right? Market's not going to
Mhm.
remember, budget's not going to remember, like unless it's huge, right? So, but to answer that question, after you've done that research, right? It's all about the story that you're telling. That's all any of this is. Our entire world is based on stories. It's all predicated on stories. So if you're able to tell a story that's beyond, hey, here's what I think is going to work, but rather here's why I think this is going to work, right? Here's what this person's doing. Here's what this person's doing. Here are the gaps that I see, and here's how we can fulfill those, and make it as visual as possible. Even if it's something where it's like you want to do an animation, take the extra step to make a deck version of it, right? Or a storyboard, or some sort of like something that helps people visualize what it is that's in your head, because you always have the movie in your head, but it's your job to communicate what that movie is. So how do you take all of those disparate pieces and then say, now here's what the test looks like. Here's what our success metrics are going to look like. Here's how I know if it's working. Here's how I know if it's not working. And if it's not working, here's how we abandon the project or pivot it. Right.
Mhm.
So it's always giving those options of here's the informed bet that I'm taking. Here's the research that supports what that is. Here's what I need to make a small version of that bet. And if it works, then here's the next step. And if it doesn't work, here's the other step, right? And contingency plans, because people are scared. So
Mhm.
how do you massage those fears in a way where it's like you have control of what you're doing? It's not just a matter of like your head's in the clouds, and that's where I've had the most trouble. But it's not just that your head's in the clouds and this is what I think is going to work. It's like, no, this is a very informed hypothesis, and here's
Mhm.
why, and here's my plan, and you're like in total control.
Yeah. This is a mini lesson in office politics and pitching ideas to leadership, which I've also had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So this next one, and this might be the last one, but it was actually for me. So I'm curious, for a lot of folks who may not have a huge audience yet, they don't have a media
Mhm.
production or anything built out yet. They don't have many visitors or listeners on their podcast. How do you figure out how to get people to share that stuff if you don't already have people to ask?
I'm having so I'm actually in that place right now with the show, right? Is you've you've got it's the premise that carries the show. I'm not putting anything behind it right now. And I've talked to a handful of people. We've got the guests. You guys are much better at this than I am, so I don't know why you're asking me this question. But we've got the
I think
guests. We have
perceptions differ here.
uh, we've got the assets that go out to each guest. We put out, these really solid, well-edited trailers for everything that we do. And even if nobody's seeing it, right, we put in the work to make sure that it carries. In case somebody does, then we know that it's going to say something good about them when they do share it. And we've created this like little branded package. For me, it's all about what the content is, right? And I'm not, I know better than build it and they will come. But at the same time, like content is a form of social currency. So if we create something that somebody sees and we've got a nice little packaging around it, and they like it, then it's going to carry itself. So my show is probably the best example of this I've got right now. It's actually the most top of mind. I don't want to keep being the guy who's like, come watch my show, but come watch my show. Where I'm starting to see people in that I don't know sharing this stuff. Like, we're getting shouted out by people I have no idea who they are. And that's exactly the dream. I have no idea how they found us. I have no idea who they are. But I do know that I know the work that we're putting into it. And I know that we're putting it out there, you know, primarily through my Twitter channel, primarily through my LinkedIn, and YouTube starting to give us some love in the algorithm. But other than that, it's just, I hate to say it, but it's like, come up with a good premise and do the work to get as much distribution as possible, even if it's just from the guests. Now, you know, you guys do the surround sound technique, which is, you know, going and blanketing the market and doing a lot more outreach that I'm willing to do. And that accelerates things a lot faster, I think. But what we're going to do now that we're at a point where we found this content market fit is actually we're going to start throwing some paid ads behind it. We're repurposing the content to podcast version. We're going to start throwing some paid ads at it. We're working with an agency that's going to be doing that. And now I am a lot bigger fan of, I'm more comfortable spending my own money to pay for these ads because I know that we've reached this validation point where we're growing organically, you know, right around 100 people a month, new subscribers every month on YouTube. And then like it's the crawl, walk, run approach, right? Like, we crawled, we saw some traction. Now we're throwing some money behind it. And now what's going to happen after that? I don't know what's going to happen after that, but I'm really excited for the next step.
Yeah. What platforms are you going to be running ads on?
I don't know. No, the main thing is I'm working with a company called Mopod, and they focus primarily on that. And they have very targeted ads for the audiences that they're trying to go after. I'm just working with somebody else to take care of it because I don't have time for that. I'm a solo consultant. So
yeah, we may have to take a look at that. That is fascinating.
Good.
Yeah, I can relate to the feeling of people just randomly sharing your stuff out in the wild, and you look into it and you're like, I have no clue who this person is. We have no connections on LinkedIn, but I'll take it. And you have to ask, like, oh, why are they sharing it? And I think that's where the digging happens.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most important piece is, like, now with the people that who have been sharing this stuff, I'll like reach out to them and be like, hey, how did you come up with this or find us? And they're like, I have no idea. There was one example of this where I asked somebody how they found it. And then they told me that this influencer in Latin America had shared it in their top 10, you know, they did like a little story on LinkedIn of their top 10 resources. And we ended up in there. And I'm like, how did you hear about this? I'm like, they're like, I don't remember. Somebody else shared it. I'm like, who is this person? So it's like, you know, it's starting to have this coefficient of, you know, virality, small one, but like what we're looking at. And it's a lot of it's just a trust in the premise that we've put out there and the constant refinement that we're doing to the work itself. So that's my best guess.
Yeah, that can open up a whole conversation around like developing a premise and having a hypothesis behind it. But I'm not going to take us down that path today. Perhaps another office hours. But Tommy, I think those are all the questions. Thanks so much for taking the time to teach us about infusing soul into our content, and excited to maybe have you back again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everybody so much for willing to be listening to me rant for an hour.
That's what we're here for. All right. Thanks, Tommy.
All right. Bye.